read the article in their reading packet about Mr. Nelson, and so you have some idea of what he's done and why it's important for you to be here today. But for the benefit of the others, let me give just a little bit of an introduction. For nearly 30 years now, Ted's been a pioneer in envisioning, developing, and implementing cutting-edge uses of the computer. He's one of the fathers of word processing, and he's the father of hypertext system, which he'll describe some in his talk to us. And also, he coined the term hypermedia. He's written a couple of important books, Computer Lib Dream Machines in the early 1970s, in which he envisioned and foreshadowed many of the current uses of computers, and also the book Literary Machines, which describes his efforts to bring about a universal hypertext system, which is known by the name Xanadu. Mr. Nelson currently lives in the Bay Area in Sausalito, California. And not too long ago, he moved from San Antonio, where he lived for 6 years, I believe. He presently is associated with the company Autodesk, and he's continuing his work there in California on these projects I've mentioned. It's my pleasure. Well, he did ask me to mention one more thing, and that was that Playgirl magazine once voted him one of the 10 most eligible men in the United States. 100, okay. It's my pleasure to turn the floor over to Ted Nelson.
Thanks. Well, you know, that sort of an introduction kind of creates a barrier. Once I was even as you. I was a student and very puzzled by what I was told and what I heard in classes, and somewhat dubious of many things I heard, and yet deeply devoted to the ideal of knowledge. I went to school to get an education, and everybody kept pushing me to get a degree. Do you understand the difference? It's a very, very heavy difference. I feel I got an education, but they don't let you do it in 4 years. I mean, they make you do it in 4 years. My education was rudely interrupted by graduating, and I didn't like that at all, so I went to graduate school, not because I wanted a degree, but because I wanted to, there were some things I still wanted to know. And it's not set up that way. See, if you really want an education, arrange to stay an undergraduate for 6 or 7 years, because you have total freedom, really. You may not feel that way, but they let you get away with murder, and that's how it should be. I mean, you should be able to read and study anything you like. When I was in college at Swarthmore, I essentially made up my own courses, and I was pushing into psycholinguistics before anybody had courses on that. I got into Marshall McLuhan. We're talking about the mid-'60s, when 3 people had heard of Marshall McLuhan outside of Canada. And trying to find and understand what seemed right, okay? I mean, I was interested in philosophy, I was interested in language, and mainly I was interested in the problems of writing and artistic creation, because I was going to be a writer and a movie maker. And there's no particular education needed for that, right? I mean, you just do it. But you find out what you need personally for what your career is going to be. I mean, everybody has a shining star. Everyone has something resonant with them out there in the world you want to do. I mean, lots of people don't do it, or they suppress it, or they just want to get married or something. But many of you I know have something that's vibrating inside you, and you're trying to find it at what it is in the world that's going to be that thing for you to do. And I've had a really tough time, but I'm very proud that I followed my star. Okay? I went to graduate school in sociology, it was called. I wanted to know, that was the one thing they didn't have at Swarthmore, so I figured that was where all the real insights were, because they sure weren't anywhere else that I looked. And it was there that I took a computer course. Now we're talking fall of 1960. What did a computer look like in the fall of 1960? It looked like a locomotive, and they kept it in an air-conditioned room. And you had it with a deck of file cards, all correctly punched. But I had done a few original things before, and I was used to ignoring what people told me and looking at things for what they really are. Can you learn that trick? Can you learn to look at things and say, never mind what they've said this is. I'm just going to look at it and see what it is. And here was this course in computers, and we were supposed to add numbers and multiply things in our programs. But I said, wait a minute, you can test whether this byte is a character. And here in the manual, you can put screens on these things. And the prices are going down, so according to my professor, they'd be able to put the whole computer on a circuit chip in a year or two. Well, this was 1960. It took a little longer than that. So wait a minute, we can put pictures on screens. We can put words on screens. This is the way to read and write. This is the way to make movies. There is no other agenda. Now is the time to design the systems we are going to want when everybody's got a computer on their desk. And I started telling people about this. They thought I was raving mad. And in a way I was, because who knows what grains of truth there are in those madmen that they put away. And so in a fugue of raving excitement during the months of November and December of 1960, in my mind I invented word processing and outline processing, and a couple months later image synthesis, and all these things went through my head, and I figured out how to do all these things, or the beginnings of how to do all these things, and started designing what I would want my computer to do for me when I had it on a screen on my desk, 6 months from now, 2 years from now, whenever that would be. Well, of course, it was 17 years. But you see, that's how you get in on the ground floor. You don't wait till somebody tells you. You don't wait for somebody to hand it to you packaged in a course. Because by then it's over and done. By then the thoughts have all been thunk, or a lot of them. Now, the best way to learn a field is to invent it. There's no question. Because there are no boundaries. No one is telling you, this is where communication ends and literature begins. This is where rhetoric, all these silly boundaries which are in the minds of academics. They're in the college catalogs. They're in the political divisions that somebody made for some reason when they divided up the curriculum. But the interconnectedness of ideas knows no boundaries, knows no borders, knows no toll booths and customs sheds. It's all one. All ideas are one thing, which is basically the problem that was bothering me from the beginning, because the problem that bothered me from the beginning was how to write. You have all these ideas. You've been told, of course, that you write a paper by making all these file cards, and then you spread them out and say, well, this obviously goes first, and this obviously goes first, and this obviously goes first, and that's the trouble. They all obviously go first. And getting your thoughts in order for a term paper becomes extremely difficult. Not because there's anything wrong with your mind. It's because there is no intrinsic, no right or wrong first idea. And that's why writing is complicated. Because taking all the interconnections of the thoughts and putting them in a linear order, this is like the way we cut a hog to fit a deep freeze. You know, you're hacking it to pieces and cutting those threads of interconnection in order just to make one set of interconnections on a single thread with a beginning and a middle and an end. In my outlines, of course, it's beginning, end, and then I have to decide which to, never mind. So, I had this problem in school, and most people think, well, I have this problem because I'm not a good writer. There must be something wrong with me that I can't organize thoughts. I was not hampered by this mistake because I knew I was a good writer. So there must be something hard about organizing ideas. And this is the center. What is the way we organize ideas? Well, in our minds, you see, the ideas are all organized every which way. Everything connects with everything else. But on paper, when you have to put it on paper, well, then you have to make this sequence. So that was what was one of the things that was bothering me back when I was an undergraduate. And when I took this computer course, I said, wait a minute. We don't have to do that anymore. Why put ideas in sequence? Why should writing be sequential? Now that we have a screen, and now that the reader can make a choice, we no longer have to have that strange sequential march, that procession of ideas all in a sequence. So, I coined the term hypertext around 1963, and hypermedia about the same time, but I thought that was a gross word because I couldn't think of a decent singular, and media, the word media, of course, is plural, at least it was in those days, to those of us who had any etymological conscience, whatever. But the real question was, well, I use the term hypertext simply to mean non-sequential writing. You see, we don't read a book in a sequence. Most of us don't. I mean, you look at it, you weigh it, turn it over, go back, look at the front, skip around, and then maybe read the chapters that have been assigned, or at least the first couple pages so you can say something early in the class that makes it sound as though you read it. But we don't read in sequence, and we don't think in sequence. Why should we write in sequence? And my assertion to you is that we've written in sequence all these years because pages are numbered, because that's the way books have to be printed, and that's the only reason. Now, Marshall McLuhan thought, he was this Canadian philosopher of media, right? And a very peculiar fellow. I didn't really understand his books till I had the privilege of lunching with him once before he died. He was a wonderful man. I loved him as a person. He had a warmth I've never seen. But on the other hand, he wouldn't let you get a word in edgewise. Fortunately, I heard what I wanted to know about his thinking. He wouldn't listen about hypertext, but it seems that he believed, well, we all know he believed that ideas have to be in sequence. It turns out that that's his idea of the proper conduct of civilization. For ideas to be in sequence and armies to march in squares and everything to be in neat rows and blocks, which he said was essentially the center of Western civilization. And he then said television was changing all that because it was making our minds non-linear and making us susceptible to hazes and miasmas and nuances, but at the same time less able to speak clearly and in consecutive sentences. Well, my position is that we should be able to speak in clear and consecutive sentences because speech is sequential. But at the same time, we should be able to write in grander aggregates that are not necessarily sequential because, after all, we don't read sequentially, we don't think sequentially. The idea is to get ideas across. And so that is the purpose of hypertext. Question? Yeah.
You've said a lot about both hypertext and then you've referred to hypermedia, but your emphasis seems to be on the written word. How important is graphics, sound, and maybe touch and feel at some future time?
Well, as I said, I consider myself a writer and a movie maker, okay? But we're talking bandwidth. In other words, the amount of stuff you can squirt through a wire is limited. For example, today's modems allow you to send 2,400 baud down a phone wire. And that's 2,400 bits per second. And and in characters, well, that's about 500 characters per second. Okay, or maybe a little more than 100 words per second. So the average word seems to be 5 characters. So that's how much text will go through the wire. Now, if you make a picture, if you send a picture down the wire and make each dot, give each dot 8 gray levels, well, that gives you down the wire 500 dots in the same second. 100 words or 500 dots. So to get a postage stamp quality picture will take you as long as to get half a chapter. And so simply in terms of the transmission time, words have much more payoff. Now a picture is worth 1,000 words. In other words, 5,000 bytes. So let's say a minimal picture is 5,000 bytes, okay? And In other words, there is this trade-off of being able to transmit much more in words. And also what I can say in words without drawing a picture on the board is considerable. But there is a word-picture continuum. I believe that almost anything can be said in words and almost anything can be said in pictures. But some things are more easy to say in pictures and some things are more easy to say in words, and obviously we want both. And I consider all the other media of paramount importance. It's just that words are the most bang per buck. And so, and will occupy a unique position for this reason.
That seems to be limiting yourself to transmission speeds now the same way you limited yourself to the computer that was available in 1960.
I'm not limiting it to anything. I said for today's it's 2400 baud, but for any bandwidth you have the same trade-offs. You will not be able to send a video picture in less bandwidth than a paragraph of words, and that is the nature of the pipe. That is the nature of information theory, which we don't have any control of. So, and you'll essentially be paying more for the video images because because of the transmission time. And whatever the royalty and payout and whatever you're paying for the acquisition of the material, the transmission restrictions are going to be a bottleneck. So that's all I'm saying. So I'm not restricting you in any way. And if you can store, and the Xanadu is intended for the storage of all data in any format, and also to create standardized formats for all data, so that you can have a standardized format for pictures, standardized formats for words, and so forth and so on. And that means that everybody's programs can deal with, can create data of this kind, and then receive data of this kind simply according to these standardized formats. So we're trying to create a standardized data structure for hypermedia of all kinds, which means essentially solving the generalized data structure problem, having a standardized data structure for all data. And no one else has, I haven't heard a proposal for this anywhere else. We use the link mechanism to essentially label the different data types, and we use various other mechanisms to make them standard. The closest sort of thing you hear is, say, IBM's document content architecture, DCA, which is meant to be, which is a limited transmission standard between some features of IBM's word processors. I mean, that's the kind of level other people are at. Xanadu is trying to establish a set of conventions for all data across all media, so that no longer do we have data conversion problems anywhere. Yeah.
Okay, I have a problem. I don't have any problems envisioning Xanadu as a Western educated man, but I have a problem when I start getting into realizing that man is not only thought, man is also tradition, man is also inner sensibility, man is all this other compounds. And across cultures and across the world, man varies. Man does not have the same feel for things. You don't have the same religious feelings, or not even the same basic principles for what's good or what's evil. Now, when you talk about standardizing it, and by the year 2020 having 1 billion people all being so nicely being able to communicate with this information, well, it sounds nice, it sounds feasible. I can't believe in it. However, it does sound like a little technological imperialism in a sense, because you're going to have to adjust the technology and able to be in touch with this.
I'm going to have to do what?
You're going to have to adjust to the technology. Your thought as a Chinese in the middle of a province, in the middle of China somewhere, is going to have to adapt to a certain sense to this new technology and this new Western thought. Correct me if I'm wrong, your icon.
I don't see it that way. I don't see it that way. In other words, you're writing in Chinese characters. You're writing exactly what you'd write with the Chinese did have printing presses before the Western world, in which they standardized the form of the characters, several thousand, and they've even had Chinese typewriters, and it's no more of a restriction than the typewriter, than the Chinese typewriter for them. You don't get that?
No.
I'm saying that. All right. Where are you from?
Mexico.
Mexico. Okay. So do you agree that writing in Spanish, this is possible? I'm not saying you have to write in English. You can write in Spanish. Okay. So every people from every country can use their own alphabet.
No, but in order for me to join just the Xanadu network, just in order for me to think, okay, just to think in the certain process way that I have to think, to make use of the technology, I have to change my traditional or even my inner thinking patterns. Okay, I don't know if you understand.
I don't.
If you understand.
If you were,
That's the difference in cultures. You see, you can understand it. I can't.
well, but correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you write on paper and in books in Mexico. And so all I'm talking about is the kind of things you put on paper and in books. What your inner thoughts are, I'm not trying to control, I'm not trying to affect. I want you to have those inner thoughts.
For example, inner thought of the Chinese is very ordered. The whole philosophy of over 3,000 years or whatever, Confucianism and Taoism is based on the order of the world. Everything is to be ordered, and all that is not in order breaks the continuity of the universe.
And by order, do they mean sequence?
Yes, they do in many cases. In other cases, they don't. But you see, then you have a cultural problem when you think about sequentiality and non-sequentiality. That in order for them to change it to Xanadu, it's a very deep cultural change, as I see it.
But you can publish a sequential book on Xanadu. There's no problem with that. On the other hand, the ground rules are anybody can publish a footnote or a marginal note. And you may not like what they publish, but that's freedom. That's freedom of the press. So that in the sense of offering freedom of the press in the American and Western tradition, perhaps that is alarming. The idea that people can publish marginal notes to anything you publish. But aside from that, I'm not sure I get. Yes.
In this country, we have a common carrier system where we typically separate the content from conduit, like in the phone system. Would Xanadu be run as a common carrier, or is that an obsolete concept?
Well, those are political words, because common carrier immediately subjects you to essentially drayage charges. The common carrier was originally in the ICC rules that created it, I guess, in the 1890s. A common carrier was defined as someone who offered services to all comers at the same price, and became restricted forever afterward in both the method of delivery and the prices for this delivery. An extremely inconvenient form of restriction. So if the term common carrier comes to be applied, then certain restrictions apply under the law. And so clearly it is in our political interest to avoid that terminology. But this is a political question.
Manage the content.
Pardon?
Would the people who run the system manage the content?
Not in any way.
They would be completely barred from... Okay.
That is basically the intent, yes.
Okay.
In other words, the content is... Xanadu is an empty vessel, which I and a bunch of idealists are attempting to create. Now, there will be immense political problems along the way, because remember all the political problems we've had with freedom of speech, freedom of the press? You ain't seen nothing yet. And all I'm saying is let's build the best system possible as fast as we can and get it into operation as fast as we can, so that the advantages outweigh the advantage that those who want to restrict freedom of the press would try to tell us about. In other words, they want to say, you know, there's this reason and that reason we shouldn't have freedom of the press, and I say, hooey, let's get the thing going fast.